It was a scorching summer afternoon, and the house felt quieter than usual. I was in the kitchen, chopping fruits for a refreshing salad, trying to keep my thoughts occupied. My husband was away, as usual, busy with work that demanded more of his time than our family did. I had grown used to the long hours and the loneliness that came with them, but something about today felt different. Jason, my 21-year-old stepson, entered the kitchen unexpectedly. His presence was always easygoing, full of youthful energy that seemed to brighten the room. Over the years, I had grown fond of him, thinking of him as a part of my family. But lately, I'd noticed subtle changes in how he behaved around me, and it was becoming harder to ignore. "Hey, need any help?" he asked, his voice casual yet slightly uncertain. He glanced at the fruits I was slicing, then at me, his gaze lingering for a split second too long. I smiled, handing him a knife. "Sure. You can start with the cantaloupe." He nodded and moved closer, standing beside me as he awkwardly began slicing. His hands were steady at first, but as the moments passed, I noticed a slight tremor in his grip. At one point, our hands brushed when I reached for a bowl, and he froze for a moment before pulling back quickly, muttering an apology. "It's fine," I said lightly, pretending not to notice the awkwardness. But inwardly, I couldn't shake the growing awareness of him. As we worked, I caught him stealing glances at me, his eyes darting away every time I turned toward him. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there, a hesitation, a tension I hadn't felt before. The room suddenly felt smaller, the air thicker. "Looks like we're all set," I said, breaking the silence and sliding the finished salad onto the counter. Jason nodded, his face slightly flushed, as if embarrassed by something he couldn't explain. He lingered for a moment longer than necessary before muttering something about needing to make a phone call and leaving the room. I stood there alone, staring at the empty doorway, replaying the interaction in my mind. I told myself it was nothing, just a passing moment. Jason was young, probably shy or nervous about something unrelated. But deep down, I knew better. His glances, the accidental touches, the way his voice had wavered, it all felt deliberate, even if he hadn't intended it to. That evening, as I sat on the couch waiting for my husband to return, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between Jason and me. It was faint, like a shadow moving just out of sight, but it was there. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't ignore it. The days that followed felt strange, as if an invisible line had been drawn between Jason and me, though either of us acknowledged it. He started hanging around the house more often, offering to help with tasks he never cared for before. At first, I thought nothing of it. But soon, it became clear his presence wasn't random. One afternoon, I was folding laundry in the living room when Jason walked in. He didn't say much, just sat on the couch and turned on the TV. I kept working, but I could feel his eyes on me, stealing glances whenever he thought I wasn't looking. It made me uneasy, though I tried not to let it show. "You've been busy," he said after a while, his tone casual but his expression more serious than usual. "Just keeping things in order," I replied, not meeting his gaze. He didn't respond, and the silence stretched out longer than it should have. Finally, I looked up, and his eyes locked onto mine. There was something in his expression, curiosity, maybe, or something deeper, that left me unsettled. Later that week, I decided to spend some time by the pool, hoping to clear my mind. I wasn't expecting company, but Jason appeared not long after, claiming he needed a break from his studies. He dropped his towel onto a chair and jumped into the water without hesitation. I stayed on my lounge chair, pretending to be engrossed in a book. But when he surfaced from the pool, water dripping from his hair and shoulders, I couldn't help but glance up. He caught me looking, and for a brief moment, either of us looked away. "You're not getting in?" he asked, his voice light but his eyes heavy with meaning. "No," I said, shaking my head. "I'm fine here." He swam closer to the edge, resting his arms on the side of the pool. His gaze lingered on me in a way that felt far too intimate. I felt the heat rise within me, not from the sun, but from the tension between us. "You've been quiet lately," he said, his tone softer now. I shrugged, trying to deflect. Just tired, I guess. Jason didn't push further, but the way he looked at me made it clear he wasn't buying my answer. After a while, he climbed out of the pool, grabbing his towel and drying off. As he walked past me, water droplets falling onto the hot pavement, I felt my heart race. In the quiet moments after he left, I sat there, replaying everything in my mind. I couldn't deny that something was happening, something I wasn't ready to confront. The way he looked at me, the way he lingered near me, it wasn't innocent anymore. It was deliberate, and the weight of it was impossible to ignore. It was late at night, and the house was quiet. I had gone to the kitchen for some water, hoping to clear my mind. The air felt heavy, not just from the summer heat but from the tension that had been building over the past few weeks. I didn't expect to see Jason there, shirtless and leaning against the counter as he rummaged through the fridge. "You're up late," I said, trying to sound casual, though my voice betrayed the nervousness I felt. "Couldn't sleep," he replied without looking at me. He closed the fridge and turned around, his eyes meeting mine. Something in his expression made my breath catch, a mixture of vulnerability and boldness I hadn't seen before. For a moment neither of us spoke. The silence between us was loud, filled with words neither of us dared to say. I could feel the weight of his gaze, the way his eyes lingered, not on the glass in my hand but on me. "I've been meaning to ask you something," he said, his tone hesitant. I tilted my head, trying to play it off as nothing. "What's that?" He hesitated, then took a step closer. "Do you ever feel like you don't belong where you are?" The question caught me off guard. I searched his face, unsure of how to answer. "What do you mean?" "I mean," he said, his voice soft, "like you're meant for something else, something more. Like you're stuck in a life that doesn't really fit you." I didn't know how to respond. The honesty in his words, the way they mirrored feelings I'd buried deep inside, left me shaken. Before I could think of an answer, he stepped closer again, close enough that I could feel the warmth of his presence. "Jason," I started, but he cut me off. "I know this is wrong," he said quickly, his voice trembling. "I know I shouldn't feel this way, but I can't stop. I've tried and I can't." I stared at him, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. "We can't," I whispered, my voice barely audible. He didn't move, didn't look away. "I think about you all the time. I try not to, but I can't help it. You're all I see." His words hung in the air, raw and unfiltered. I wanted to tell him to stop, to leave, to pretend this conversation never happened. But I didn't. I couldn't. When he reached out, brushing his fingers lightly against my arm, it felt like fire. I should have pulled away, should have told him this was impossible. Instead, I stood frozen, letting the moment stretch into something it shouldn't have been. Then it happened. His lips touched mine, tentative at first but quickly deepening. The kiss was electric, overwhelming, and entirely wrong. I pulled back abruptly, tears in my eyes. "This can't happen," I said, my voice breaking. Without waiting for his response, I turned and left the room, leaving him standing there in silence. The next morning was unbearable. The air between us was thick with everything left unsaid. I avoided looking at Jason, focusing instead on mundane tasks, hoping to regain some sense of normalcy. But every time he entered the room, my pulse quickened, and I felt the weight of his presence. At breakfast, he sat across from me, unusually quiet. My husband chatted about work, oblivious to the tension crackling between Jason and me. I nodded along, pretending to listen, but my mind was elsewhere, replaying the kiss over and over. After my husband left for work, Jason lingered in the living room. I tried to avoid him, but when I walked past, he called out softly, "Can we talk?" I froze. I knew I couldn't avoid this conversation forever. Without a word, I turned and sat down on the edge of the couch, keeping as much distance as possible. "I'm sorry," he began, his voice filled with regret. "I never should have. I didn't mean to make things harder for you." I shook my head, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. "Jason, what happened last night, it can't happen again. We crossed the line. I know, he said quickly, leaning forward. I know it's wrong. But I can't pretend I don't feel the way I do. You mean more to me than anyone else ever has. His words cut through me like a knife. I wanted to tell him to stop, to leave me alone, but the sincerity in his voice made it impossible. This isn't fair, I said finally, my voice trembling. Not to me, not to you, and definitely not to your father. He flinched at the mention of his father, but he didn't back down. I can't help how I feel, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I know you feel something too. Don't tell me you don't. The truth hung heavy between us. I couldn't deny it anymore. I had felt something I couldn't explain or justify. But that didn't make it right. What we feel doesn't matter, I said firmly, though my voice wavered. We have to let this go, Jason. We can't do this to him. He looked at me with a mix of pain and determination. I don't want to hurt him, he said. But I can't pretend this isn't real. You're the only person who's ever made me feel this way. Before I could respond, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway shattered the moment. My husband was home early. Jason and I exchanged a panicked glance, and he quickly stood up, retreating to his room without another word. As I watched him disappear down the hallway, I felt an ache in my chest that I couldn't explain. The lines had been blurred, the boundaries broken, and nothing would ever be the same again. My heart was torn between guilt, loyalty, and something I dared not name. And for the first time, I wasn't sure what I would do next.